Thank you to all to be here. Here are a few information on the logistics to accommodate you, whether you are here in person or an online participant. You have an interpretation button for those on Zoom that can help you select the English channel if you're listening in English, or if you want to access to the French translation. Please be sure that your full name and ideally your organization appears in Zoom, following the instructions in the chat box to do so. Please be informed that the virtual forum will be recorded. Please mute your microphone where you do not speak. And during the question and answer session and the discussion sessions, you will be invited to take the floor. Following the reservation order, so you can request the floor with the raise hand button in the reaction menu. Participants are all welcome to provide comments and ask questions at any time in the Zoom chat box. We have a tech support that is following all your questions and comments online, and that will make sure to give you the floor. So today we have, I'm the coordinator on this session. I'm a half moderator because I was supposed to be there locally. So I'm very glad today to have the support of Frédéric Villers from the French Biodiversity Agency to help with the debate in the room. And we are very glad to have Carole Martinez from MedPan as a reporter. So here's the link to the roadmap today. The objective of this discussion session is to really capture concrete recommendations that will enrich the post-2020 roadmap for Mediterranean MPAs that we are all here to prepare. So this session relates to the following objective: strategic objective 1, further develop Mediterranean MPA policy and government structures to be more equitable, integrated with other sectors, and responsive to local MPA conditions. One comment to the support tech: there are 3 people in the waiting room. I cannot accept them while talking. If you can let them join the room, please. Okay, and then the relevant recommendations attached to this strategic objective is recommendation 1.4, ensure that MPA needs are taken in account and integrated in coastal and marine spatial planning to reduce conservation and development conflicts. So today we need to propose some new recommendations that can take the form of actually recommendations, or that can take the form of actions that will be needed to achieve the roadmap recommendations. You can also propose some suggestions for monitoring indicators. How will we be monitoring our work in this roadmap? And what are the partnerships needed for the roadmap recommendations and its implementation? So I will give a short presentation to introduce the background of this session. And first recommendations from the case study we proposed to the forum. So the background of this session is that most maritime economy sectors are growing in the Mediterranean. In 2015, WWF published a report entitled Blue Growth in the Mediterranean, the challenge of good environmental status. And in that report that you'll find on the MedTrans website, we showed how and how much each the main sectors of the blue economy, the maritime economy, were actually growing in the Mediterranean, sometimes at a very fast speed, and at the same time, most countries, all countries were supposed to declare and to establish new marine protected areas. So we see most sectors growing, sometimes at a fast rate, except the professional fishing sector, which is in some areas in decline. And at the same time, you have the growth of the number of MPAs. So of course, all of this results in an overlap and everybody's looking for space to do their own activity, to do their own business. And at the same time, nature is also looking for space for conservation areas. So you basically see that there's a problem, and that's why maritime spatial planning, among other reasons, was decided as a strategy by a number of public organizations to try to put some order into this era of change, if I may call it this way. So maritime spatial planning, which aims at organizes spatially uses and activities in the Mediterranean, is in progress in all the Mediterranean. First, in the EU countries, where a directive from 2014 has established a framework for maritime spatial planning, and actually 2021 was the deadline for each EU country with a sea to provide its maritime spatial first maritime spatial plan. But maritime spatial planning is also developing in non-EU countries, and all these efforts should be based on an ecosystem approach. This is a fundamental principle of the directive, but also the Barcelona Convention has been very clearly promoting an ecosystem-based approach for the development of economic activities. So this has very important consequences for MPAs. Basically, around all our MPAs, the general landscape is very much changing and fast changing. How do we deal with this today in this roadmap? So I would like to share briefly with you the lessons learned from a project we did very recently called the Pharos for MPA project. And basically, looking at this background that I just introduced, we thought, okay, what recommendations could we provide regarding the interactions between MPAs and 7 sectors that we analyzed? And the 7 sectors are, you can see them on the left. There was maritime transport, leisure boating, recreational fisheries, small-scale fisheries, cruise, offshore wind farms, and aquaculture, which are 7 sectors that are very much operating in the Mediterranean. And the recommendations were targeting 3 targets, 3 type of stakeholders: the maritime spatial planning authorities themselves, MPA managers, and socioeconomic stakeholders. So here is a visual representation, a theoretical representation of, sorry, I should be to the next slide. Okay, of what could be a simplified view of the maritime spatial planning regulatory approach as a complement to an MPA network. So in this slide, can you well see my slide? Yes, all? Yeah, okay.
Yes, we do.
All right, okay. So you can see in orange the border of the MSPA area. And then in dark blue,
Catherine, Est-ce que tu pourrais agrandir la slide parce qu'on ne voit pas très bien. Tu réduis sur la gauche le menu.
Ouais. Le problème, je n'ai pas accès au full screen, je ne sais pas pourquoi.
Tu peux pas mettre en mode présentation?
Si à partir, si elle est trouvée. Là, ça doit être mieux.
Super, merci.
Merci pour le coup de main. Alors, so in this slide, what you're seeing is that you see the border of the MSP area. And then in blue color, you see in dark blue, you will see the MPAs. So basically the graph says that the MSP regulatory approach is supposed to support the highest level of protection in MPAs. Then it's also supposed to keep space for new MPAs. And then MSP also includes areas of high ecological values with restriction for certain uses and sectors. This is the light blue color. And in the white area, which are areas of lesser ecological values, considerations may be required in consent procedures for projects. So this is an ideal view of how MSP and areas of ecological values, including MPAs, can potentially be interacting together. So in this project, we produced recommendations for these 7 sectors. So I'm showing you the cover pages here. There's thousands of information and recommendations in those reports, so we will not go into the detail today. But I will actually give you one example of the type of recommendations we provided for one sector, and we can discuss further afterwards. So here is an example of the recommendations we give for MPAs and fish aquaculture. So what we did for that sector is that, first of all, we did a never done before exercise. We've been mapping all aquaculture farms in MPAs all over the Mediterranean. So we've been doing this with a questionnaire, but also using Google Map. And we've been actually dividing the aquaculture farms in 2 farms, so fish farming and shellfish farming. And we did this mapping for all the MES. So it gave us an idea of which MPAs were interacting with this sector or not. Okay, and we had a scientific committee working with us, made of scientists, specialists of the aquaculture sector, and also scientists, specialists of the MPAs, to devise what recommendation we could have for that sector. So I will very briefly share with you the recommendations we had for the fish farming sector. And the key recommendations for public authorities were the following. Only marine aquaculture farms with no detrimental effect on the designated protected areas should be permitted in MPAs. And this should be decided on a case-by-case basis. For instance, the case-by-case basis was a key conclusion for that sector, because the impacts of the aquaculture business is very different from a country to the other. So it was very important to have a case-by-case approach. Fish farms with net pen settlements in areas with significant seagrass meadows and coralligenous formations or important fish habitats, spawning grounds, and nursery areas should not be allowed in MPAs. In general, habitats sensitive to the discharge of organic matter are not appropriate for shellfish aquaculture. In general, fish farms with net pen settlements inside or in the close vicinity of MPAs should be avoided. Buffer zones should be maintained between fish net pens, settlements, and protected areas. The farming of exotic species should be avoided in MPAs. Industrialized intensive fish production should be avoided in MPAs. For marine, in that project, we distinguished, strictly speaking, MPAs from marine Natura 2000 sites, because in most countries, the regulations are different for these sites. So we say that for Natura 2000 sites, the EU Commission guidelines on aquaculture and Natura 2000 offer clear advice, and that advice should be followed. Only marine aquaculture farms without a detrimental effect on the habitats and species protected under the Birds and Habitats Directive should be permitted in such areas. And this should be assessed on a case-by-case basis. So these were the key recommendations for the public authorities. And then we had recommendations for the MPA managers to establish a dialogue with that sector. Very often it's not the case. And to the business sector also to establish a dialogue with the MPA. Often the aquaculture sector only discusses with the state. Okay, so this in a nutshell, these are the this is an example of the type of recommendations we could have for one sector. Overall, the overall recommendations we gave for the whole project were the following: for national and regional authorities, avoid putting new pressure on existing MPAs through ecosystem-based maritime spatial planning and integrated coastal zone management. Where economic activities do take place, mitigate their impacts in an appropriate manner, taking in account cumulative impacts and the carrying capacity of local ecosystems. And third, implement legislation to sustainably regulate the interactions of the sectors with MPAs. For MPA manager, a very important recommendation is the first one. You need to engage in planning processes that concern the MPA and surrounding areas. And then, of course, monitor impacts of the blue economy within and in the proximity of your MPA. Integrate recommendations on the interactions between economic sectors and the protected areas in the MPA management plan. This is also extremely important. And when it's relevant, you should advocate for adequate buffer zones around the MPAs to avoid pressure from economic activities at your border when this could be an issue. And then recommendations for the different maritime business sectors: endorse and implement sustainability best practices in and around MPAs, and cooperate with national and MPA authorities and co-develop strategies to avoid impacts on marine ecosystems and biodiversity. Okay, my slide is sorry blocked. Why? Okay.
Catherine, maybe meanwhile we could ask if there is any reaction or comments on your presentation and the first suggested recommendation.
Okay, no, sorry, I'm back. I think we can keep the question for the end because we're running out of time. So I would like directly to give the floor to the two speakers. The first one will be Vassiliki Vassilopouloulou, which I will let you introduce your topic, Vassiliki. Thank you very much for being here today. And Vincent GIROUD, which will give a very interesting presentation also from the perspective of an economic sector. I think we are very lucky to have Vincent today, and will give us the perspective of the business sector. Thank you, and I give you the floor.
So good morning, everybody. As Catherine said, I'm Celia Vassilopouloulou. I'm working at the Hellenic Center for Marine Research. I'm a research director, and I've been the last 10 years involved in research projects related to the implementation of maritime spatial planning. Just to make sure, I will be sharing my screen, correct?
Yes, please. Please go ahead.
So I'm not sure if you can see it.
Yes, if you could put on full screen
Yes.
or presentation mode, that would be perfect.
So can you see it in full screen now?
Not yet.
Oh, because actually I've already placed it in full screen. So
can you try again?
yeah, let me just do it once again. Still, you cannot see it. I'm sorry, for some reason. Well, what do you think? But I think you also have it. Would you like to do it yourself? If you think that
with the IT team. Pardon? So the technical team will put your presentation on the screen. It will be easier.
Okay, great. So I will be, let me stop sharing then.
Thank you.
So I guess I'm ready to go, right?
Yes, please.
Thank you very much. So in this presentation, I will try to share some outcomes and lessons learned from engaging stakeholders in the development of planning scenarios in one of the national parks in Greece, the National Marine Park of Alolissos in northern Sporades. Next slide, please. So this park is in the central Aegean Sea. You can actually see it in the small map. It's indicated with the red fonts. And it was founded some 30 years ago for the protection of biodiversity, key biodiversity elements, but the main focus was the Mediterranean monk sea. So in this presentation, I will try to share some outcomes from the Interreg-Med project Amare that was completed a couple of years ago. And in fact, it tried to focus on multiple stressor assessment and coordinating environmental monitoring on two key biodiversity elements, the seagrass meadows and the, I'm sorry, it seems like the fonts have been a bit displaced, but anyway, so the seagrass meadows and the coralligenous reefs. Of course, all this, and this is the key important of what I would like to present you, was done in close collaboration with different stakeholders, starting from the MPA managers at the local level, other economic stakeholders, fishers, diving clubs, also tourist enterprises, but also regional authorities, and also the ministry, the central authority, was aware of our actions. This work is actually connected to Road Recommendation 1.4, as Catherine mentioned, but also, and what I would like to show here is the direct link with other recommendations and actions under this recommendation, and particularly recommendation 3.4 on the need for standardization of social ecological monitoring methods, and then recommendation 3.5 on the collaborative update of MPA management plans. So next slide, please. So the key actions under Amare were, first of all, to increase awareness of key stakeholders on the health status of these two conservation priority components. And something really important was the interaction with them to gain insight of local ecological knowledge. So fishers and diver clubs, but also, of course, MPA managers were providing data from the knowledge of the specific area. And then together, under this, let's say, sequence of interaction, we try to develop some participatory planning scenarios. So as you see in these photos, first of all, you see the seagrass meadows. We try to identify pressures derived from different human activities. So you see that for seagrass meadows, for example, main pressures were related to anchoring, and then invasive species in meadows that were at a deteriorated status. And then, of course, in coralligenous reefs, the main big problem was derelict fishing gears, but also direct impact from human activities, and mainly from fishing operations. Next slide, please. So something that was really, really interesting was, after having the first scientific, let's say, documents coming out from our research, we visualized them in maps, and we showed them to the stakeholders, trying to gather further data on, first of all, distribution, let's say, of these habitats, but also, in this case here, where you see the interaction related to anchoring data and the distribution of seagrass meadows, the MPA managers provided data on anchoring sites in the different areas around the MPA. I mean, it is pretty clear, the interaction with Posidonia meadows and anchoring. Next slide, please. So these two maps here are really, really important, you know, visualizing this interaction between stakeholders, ourselves, and the MPA managers. So in the first map, you see fishing grounds from small-scale fisheries, as you know, I'm sure, in the Mediterranean, but in general in the EU, vessels that are below 10 meters are not actually recorded. The fishing activity is not recorded. So fishers actually provided in these reddish colors fishing grounds, first of all, of long lines, and then in the second map of gill nets. So it's actually this collaborative or participatory GIS we try to develop. And then diver clubs were also updating what we already have through, the selected surveys we conducted, updated this information on coral region reefs. So this is actually presented in these grid cells that show the coralligenous reef, and then the interaction between fisheries and coralligenous. Next slide, please. So after this interaction that followed, as you understand, a series of steps, we had a final joint planning exercise where we tried using the C-Sketch platform, which is really interactive, to develop some collaborative planning scenarios. Next slide, please. So in this 2 slides here, you see a couple of examples of integrated, let's say, scenarios. In the first one, I'm not sure if it is clearly visible, but there are some orange dots where we came up with proposals for the installation of permanent moorings in areas that would create the least problem to our Posidonia meadows, and they were actually agreed by different economic stakeholders. And in the second planning scenario, which is something really interesting, and it was co-developed in synergy with another Interreg Med project, the Blue Med, that dealt mainly with cultural heritage issues. So in Alonissos, they found a really interesting ancient wreck. So it's an area with rich cultural heritage, and now there is a underwater museum developed in the area. So what we propose is, aside from the cultural, let's say, heritage, to also include exhibits in the museum of natural heritage. So in these 2 red circles, we have identified coralligenous reefs of high aesthetic value that would be really interesting, for visitors of the museum. And we asked the fishers to refrain from fishing in these areas. And of course, the fishers agreed because they felt that, through this, let's say, more increase, enhancement of sustainable tourism development, they would, gain profit themselves as well from the development of fishing tourism activities, but also in general, other kinds of profits from the enhancement of tourism. Next slide, please. So our basic lesson learned is, first of all, the critical success actually coming out from MRA is the engagement of these stakeholders right from the beginning of the project. This interaction that led to the establishment of and building of trust between us. So they provided also the data, and we, co-developed these planning proposals. This, in fact, and this is something that I would like to highlight, of course, the big priority in marine protected areas are conservation of key biodiversity elements. But as you know, local communities are the custodians of, biodiversity protection. They should be provided with, let's say, some opportunities for their well-being. So social, socioeconomic indicators are also very important and should be included in the development of management plans. Next, please. So coming to this, and this is how I would like to link, this MSP MPA process that are directly interlinked with the need to monitor interdisciplinary data reflecting the social ecological systems of each different MPA to develop these spatially based, tailor-made management scenarios. And of course, this should be directly linked not only to the MSP process, but also to the MSFD, to the common fisheries policy. I'm talking about, the European EU level, but of course, relate to all sorts of activities at the national scale, but also promoted through, interregional committees. So it's very important to ensure MPAs, of course, are integrated, not only taken into account, but really integrated in the MSP ICZM process. But this is directly linked with recommendation 3.4, harmonizing the social ecological monitoring, and then recommendation 3.5 on the collaboration between researchers and MPA staffs in order to update plans. That all these plans need to be adapted through monitoring and evaluation. And of course, with recommendation 1.5 on participatory processes and the development of decentralizing or governance systems that actually reflects local conditions. Next slide, please. So actions are actually related, in fact, first of all, in relation to recommendation 1.4, to, as I said, the elaboration of these tailor-made spatial management scenarios that should be fully integrated in this MSP process. And of course, I think that these are maybe truly achievable by 2030. Next. But these, of course, need to be harmonized, and it's quite clear that this strategy under 3.4 on the development of a Mediterranean-wide working group, this group needs to be interdisciplinary to account for different types of objectives, so ecological, but also socioeconomic, cultural ones, so on, support. And this needs to be in direct link with this national government task force in recommendation 3.2 to develop these smart objectives and relevant smart indicators under recommendation 3.1. So my impression is that by reading this really very important roadmap to 2030 is this very clear connections between, the different recommendations that actually one builds upon the other. So next slide, please. So finally, as I'm a scientist, I would like to highlight the very important link between collaborating with managers, scientists with managers, to actually develop this scientific criteria that should be standardized in a global Mediterranean scale, but definitely should reflect the socio-ecological conditions of each specific MPA and area. Next slide, please. And of course, this should be reflected in clearly selected indicators. There are a number of indicators in all these recommendations that I feel are interrelated. And going finally to recommendation 1.4, which is the main focus of our session, this indicator of success that is actually stated as that it should reflect the number of countries in which MPA plans are in line with MSP ICZM efforts. I would say really integrated in ICZM MSP efforts should be also considering relevant indicators under the three aforementioned recommendations. Next slide and last one, please. So I think it was quite clear that this case study actually showed the very successful interaction, but also the wealth of knowledge provided through this participatory approach at the MPA level that is really crucial to effectively address key features of the social ecological systems. I think that this, the need that we need to try achieve biodiversity conservation goals for the Mediterranean ecosystem can only really be achieved by taking actions at local scales through local communities. So MPAs are definitely the cornerstone of this effort. And then the core building blocks are partnerships, different stakeholders that are very important to actually effectively implement the designation of MPAs. And finally, of course, the whole MSP process, which in fact is very relevant if we consider that until 2030, this 30 by 30 goal is something that will be overarching. So maritime spatial planning needs to take into account, the designation of the 30% of marine space. And I would like to close with this, okay, we need to, as the IUCN statement says, we need to preserve the 30% of the planet, so 30% of our sea, but we have to preserve the right 30%. So what I would like to propose here is that we need to apply conservation planning that needs to go hand in hand with MSP in order to identify these important areas, at the national and local scale through this bottom-up approach. And then, of course, all these need to be embedded in the MSP process at the national case, but of course, considering international, inter-regional collaborations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Celia. The floor is now for Vincent Giroud.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, perfect. So I will start. I'm sharing my screen and you can see it, I hope. Is that correct? Okay,
yes.
Perfect. So
online we can see it very well. Yeah. Okay,
perfect. And thank you very much. It's my first participation to this forum. I'm Vincent Giroud from IFSUA, and IFSUA is an NGO representing brands and practitioners of underwater activities. I will talk as economic stakeholders, but presenting our work on inclusion of our activities in MPAs in the Mediterranean. Okay, so underwater activities are freediving, scuba diving, and spearfishing. Okay, we represent all of them, but in that case, we will focus on spearfishing. About spearfishing in the Mediterranean Sea, it's a recreational activity. It is practiced in apnea with a spear gun, polo spear, or even with your hand. Few fisher goes deeper than 30 meters, even very few goes deeper than 20. It's a very selective gear and it generates few waste. It is usually said that it has an impact on vulnerable species and big reproducers, but we think that we need to update all those considerations because angling and surface recreational fishery has evolved a lot in the last years with new technologies. No, so we think that we should balance a little bit this point. And also spearfishing, as Celia said, or spearfishing or diving, they have some positive impacts on the environment, such as plastic recovery. We detect a lot of lost gears and also sometimes invasive species. Recently, in fact, this weekend, there was some demonstration in the south of Spain due to a recreational fishery exclusion in MPA process. Okay, so what we wanted to do with IFSUA, with our GIS, was to map all the regulations of MPA where we have members. So we just did the work for France, Spain, and Italy. Okay. In fact, we mapped in QGIS all the areas of restrictions to spearfishing, in France, Spain, and Italy, but not only due to just MPA, but also other kind of restrictions, such as for safety, regs, marine farms, or sometimes local decisions in some areas. We mapped it in the Med, in the Atlantic, and also in the English Channel. We did not map temporary measures like period closing from one day to the others. All the restrictions were mapped by GPS coordinates. We didn't use a MapAmed because we needed a more precise detail of restrictions. Each polygon, we have more or less 700 polygons, was with its basic information, date of creation, the type of MPA or type of restriction, sorry, and with only binary considerations about authorized practices: diving, professional fishery, surface recreational fishery, spearfishing. In fact, if we have a 000, we will have a no-take area, okay? And I wanted to present some data just on parks and reserves in the Mediterranean. In fact, we have no 2000 zone identified with restrictions to fishery or strong restriction to fishery for the moment. So let's go to see some maps. This is the kind of map we can have in our GIS. In green, you can see spearfishing authorized. In blue, anglers or surface recreational fishery authorized. In orange, only professional fishery and no-take zones. Okay, so some examples, I took it, well, more by the aesthetic side of them. We have Calanques in Marseille in the north, in the upper left side with a green area, for example, a big green area. Punta Campanella in the south of Italy, you can see that there is no green in this kind of reserve. Cabo de Gata in the south of Spain, no green. Menorca is an interesting case because we have some reserves on the north and the south, and a park on the east side, Albufera des Grau, with a kind of authorized practice of spearfishing in the shallow waters with a permit. And we have also, well, Tavolara in Sardinia, but we have mapped all the, with this kind of polygons, all the MPAs and parks in the Med. So those are local decisions. Let's have a look to the global impact on the activity. So this is a kind of data we can have. Let's just focus of recreational of angling and spearfishing in a comparison way in France, Italy, and Spain. And for France, we did not take into account, I talked about that with Catherine, the bigger part of Golfe du Lion and Cap Corse, because they are so big, it will distortionate a little bit the data. But at the end, not so much, because France, as you can see, has quite inclusive model regarding spearfishing. In fact, 93.6% of the surface, we can do surface fishing, angling, and 84.2% spearfishing. When we go to Italy, we just have a 66% of angling, but 8.3% of surface for spearfishing. And in Spain, we have less space for recreational fishing, angling, 41%, and 17% for spearfishing. And you have the total area covered in square kilometers. Okay. Some considerations. The data have been validated by our network, and we are currently working with CESTIC, as you will see, to publish this data. Okay. It is a model to be improved. We are currently working on that because, for example, in surface fishing, in angling, we should differentiate some modalities. cause from both jigging, spinning, surface trolling, because they have a different impact. And we will also add some permits requirements and so on. Okay, and for us, it would be very interesting to assess restrictions comparing with bathymetry. Okay, it would be more relevant. On the results, you have seen that some countries have more inclusive models than others regarding spearfishing. But in all countries, there is a difference of access between anglers and spearfishers. And we are wondering if it is justified and proportional with the today practice, with the evolution of all technologies in recreational fishery and the evolution that Catherine mentioned of the practice in general. And we are wondering if is it really effective, okay? When we go to the top level of the data, we can clearly think that the 30-30 objectives is a threat to spearfishing activity in some countries. But we also think that it is reciprocal, because by excluding some activities, can be spearfishing, can be recreational fishery in some cases, they are all the most active trying to stop MPA creation. And we miss probably the positive impact that that Celia was mentioning of involving stakeholders and engage them in the protection of the area. We have been designing an inclusive model for recreational fishing based on resource management, not on modality. We think that you should say what we can fish and not how, okay? And a model, evolutive model with based also on declaration of catch and of effort of recreational fishery. Some learnings, I didn't go to the roadmap, MPA roadmap to say exactly where to put that. I think that it's clear that recreational fishery has evolved and will evolve a lot. Monitoring of fishing effort and resources in MPA is necessary and should allow more inclusive model based on real and updated impact. Okay. More generally, with an extension of homogeneous models of MPAs to reach 30-30 coverage, the impact of management decisions on traditionally most excluded modalities may become unfair and undesirable. So to our point of view, 30% objective should be accompanied by do not leave anyone behind approach based on science assessment and of all fisheries modality. Thank you very much. All those work will be taken by Valerios Bragaglia. Maybe he's connected to this session, and he is currently working with a group of scientists to see what we can do with our data. Thank you very much, and don't hesitate to send me an email or to ask your questions. And Catherine, I leave you back the screen.
Thank you very much, Vincent, also for your presentation. We had two great case studies giving different perspectives today. We would like to maybe ask Fred to maybe now take the lead on handling the discussion. Fred, there's one question online that maybe you want to start with.
Yes, for the question online, maybe we can start with this one. Can you read it, maybe, Catherine?
Yes, this is a question from Yeza Santana, and she would like to ask Celia if she already has some ideas of participatory governance indicators and if she can explain them. And maybe, Celia, if you can give an overall answer on this, because this could be a very long answer needed on indicators. We need to keep some time for the discussion on the recommendations, but if you can give an overall answer to Yeza, that would be great.
Yes, thanks to Yeza and Catherine for the question. I would like to say that in Amare, particularly in Greece, we did not manage to come up with governance, let's say, indicators, as the process is a bit lagging behind. But actually, as Amare was a project with other partners who are involved, we tried to apply the ISEA framework, which is a framework applied to actually evaluate the effectiveness of Italian marine protected areas. So as Italy was one of the partners of Amare, so there is a wealth of indicators, governance indicators related to various ecological, but also socioeconomic, and also related to cost effectiveness of the MPA, so on and so forth. So there is a wealth of information in this kind of frameworks. But as I said, it was not possible for us because we lacked data from the MPA itself. And here I would like to say that, okay, there is a management plan. It's one of the MPAs that it's already there for 30 years, but the management plan is actually lagging behind. It's one of these situations that we need to bring forward efforts on really developing effective management plans that consider not only the monk seal, which was in this case our main, let's say, the main reason for designating this MPA, but should also take profit of other cultural and natural assets that are in this MPA, run proper monitoring, designating, really, let's say, adapted management plans to this, the current situation, and actually this way have the data to develop effective governance also indicators. I'm sorry I cannot give a direct answer to this question, because we were not able to really come up with our own governance indicators. But there is information, as I said, through the ISEA framework. Thanks.
Thank you. For this answer, is in the room someone who has a question about for the speakers? Yes.
Bonjour, c'est Mamoudou Sidibé, je viens du Sénégal, je suis le directeur des aires marines communautaires protégées. Dans le cadre de la planification, disons de la planification globale au niveau de la côte, notre problème principal, surtout les scientifiques et les gens de la conservation, c'est qu'on est dans la réaction. C'est-à-dire qu'on attend que les gens fassent quelque chose et qu'on essaye de planifier. Est-ce qu'on peut se projeter dans les perspectives? C'est-à-dire, aujourd'hui, ce n'est pas toute la côte aujourd'hui qui est occupée. On doit pouvoir faire une planification côtière de l'ensemble des côtes pour montrer les zones, parce qu'aujourd'hui, on a les tortues marines qui utilisent la côte-là pour la reproduction. Et souvent, dans la planification, on les oublie. Et pourtant, ils sont extrêmement importants sur ces côtes-là. Parce que les hôtels, on a vécu cette expérience. Quand il y a eu le confinement, on a eu beaucoup plus de reproduction de tortues marines sur les côtes que quand il n'y avait pas le confinement. Et donc, ça signifie que déjà, les gens qui fréquentent ces parties-là, et ou bien les lumières qui se trouvent là-bas, donc influent beaucoup sur les espèces marines. Donc, il faudra donc qu'on essaye maintenant de se projeter dans la perspective pour essayer maintenant de faire la planification sur l'ensemble des côtes donc, qui sont à notre disposition. Merci.
Is there any response? No. Peter Mackworth from Croatia. Just a quick question for Vincent. Bearing in mind with angling and surface fishing, there is the option within protected areas to do catch and release. Has that been factored into your data, first of all? And second of all, if catch and release were done in MPAs, what would be the equivalent for spearfishers? Is there an equivalent, such as underwater photography, for instance? Thanks.
Thank you for your question. I think at the moment, there is no catch in the area we have mapped. There is no catch and release zone, but we know that we will have it soon. So it's we will probably add those areas of catch and release. Okay. Catch and release for us, it's a practice mostly done to deliver right now for anglers, to deliver non-desirable catches. Okay, so when you catch a smaller fish or the fish you didn't aim, so you turn it back to the water, and this has been demonstrated in a study in Catalonia. Okay, so the equivalent for spearfishing is the not spear. Okay, so no kill, no spear, and in fact we are currently working in the equivalent, which should be a kind of no kill actions by videos. For us, the most effective, one effective measures is bag limit. Very effective for spearfishing, but also for angling. Because if you limit the number of species you can catch for vulnerable species, for example, you will turn back. If you're an angler, you will turn back maybe the smaller one, or you can continue fishing after having catch one fish. And the same in spearfishing. You won't spear a fish if it's not the one, for example, adequate, or if for the period or so on. But it is really similar approach. In fact, it's a non-spear, no spear, or you don't spear a fish if you don't want to catch it. So for me, the equivalent would be a kind of select and catch, or select and no kill. In spearfishing, it's in fact, when you practice this activity, most of the fish you see, you don't catch them, you know, you only maybe 1 or 2 in 4 or 5 hours.
Thank you. Yes, another question.
Hello, it's working? Yes. I'm Tony Font from Marilla's Foundation from Mallorca.
Hello, Tony.
Comment ça va? Je suis content de voir tes points de vue, mais je voudrais savoir jusqu'à quel point votre rôle comme association, vous avez des associés, je comprends que il y a quelqu'un qui sont spearfishers, others qui sont des plongeurs ou des centres de plongée. Alors, ici, il y a un problème de représentation. Je ne sais pas, je sais qu'il y a des positions très différentes entre les plongeurs et les centres de plongée qui célèbrent les no-take reserves, qui célèbrent les aires là où il n'y a pas de spearfishing. Alors, ma question est, si vous avez résolu cette question, si vous avez été capable de parler avec les secteurs que vous représentez pour venir avec une proposition commune dans les différents MPAs de la Méditerranée, que ça peut aider beaucoup la résolution du conflit. Parce que si vous venez, si le conflit entre spearfishers and divers se résolut à l'extérieur de la commission de cogestion ou la chose que ce soit qui doit parler de ça, ça c'est très bien, mais je crois qu'il y a des gens qui ne sont pas très contents avec cette position, alors qu'il faut apporter dans les commissions de cogestion les positions pour les harmoniser case by case. So, je comprends très bien votre position, que c'est beaucoup plus douce et beaucoup plus réflexive que la position qu'on a eue, par exemple, à Majorque, avec une plateforme qui qualifiait tout l'effort de 30 ans de réserve marine comme stop les fausses réserves. Alors, il y a un mouvement à Majorque, je le dis pour tout le monde l'entendre, qui dit que toutes les réserves marines d'intérêt de pêche, ce sont des fausses réserves parce qu'il y a de la pêche professionnelle et que ce sont des réserves privées qui déprivent des droits de pêche aux pêcheurs sous-marins. Alors, je crois que ça, c'est une position très extrême et parce que c'est l'unique, on a vu dans la présentation de Catherine que la pêche professionnelle, c'est l'unique activité qui descend, que toutes les autres montent, parce que, et alors il faut protéger la pêche professionnelle, même si à ce moment, il y a des activités de pêche professionnelle qui ne sont pas très bien réalisées, mais qu'il faut travailler comme notre fondation fait, de travailler avec les pêcheurs professionnels, et nous travaillons avec LIFE, par exemple, pour avoir une évolution dans le procès de la pêche professionnelle. Et nous voudrions que les citoyens spearfishers comprennent cette situation et qui nous accompagnent. Une autre chose, c'est que vous n'avez pas parlé de tous ceux qui ne sont pas les aires marines protégées. La carte de Minorque, par exemple, il a une grande extension qui les spearfishers peuvent pêcher et qui sont dévastés. Alors, ma question, c'est, vous croyez qu'il faut travailler dans des limitations pour la pêche en dehors des MPAs?
Est-ce que vous m'entendez? Je vois que Célia veut répondre. I will answer in English, okay? Maybe not to mix. Okay, so there are many questions. I will try to be quite quick, but I will start from the latest question. For us, being included in MPAs, i.e. spearfishers, would be an opportunity also to teach with more restrictive measures, okay? To teach to spearfishers how it should be the sustainable way to have spearfishing, with bag limits, with some measures, also closing periods, and so on. Okay. So this is our idea was to sustainable measures in MPS to be little by little extended in the other parts, okay, of the zones that you say they are devastated, okay. This is maybe the first point. The second point about professional fishery, we can understand if they are in decline, that there are some specific measures to help them, okay. But my point is more comparing the access with anglers fishing, okay? Because if this model is extending to 30% and after we will go to 50%, okay, of MPS, there will not be any more spearfishing, which is a kind of quite selective practices if it is well done, okay? So we should move all together to that. And between conflicts between divers and so on, well, for me, it's not a very, we don't have to deal with a lot of conflicts. Okay, when locally there is, I think it should be managed MPA by MPA, okay? But all together, divers and spearfishers, because sometimes we have not the opportunity to be at the same table. And we can see it in a process we are involved in Spain. We have not been able in 1.5 years to talk to divers or to professional fishers. We have only been at the table of recreational fishery. So I think that in the management process of MPS reviews and so on, we should be all at the same table to talk about the problems. And you have my contact, Tony, and the one of Shibori, if you want to talk. I think that we will talk soon with Fondation Mariles in December about other subjects. Celia, you wanted to?
Yeah, there's a question online from Celia.
Ah, okay.
Celia, go ahead.
Yes, thanks. Actually, it's a reaction to what has been discussed, so far in relation to recreational fishing. Just to share my experience from Greece and particularly from the different MPAs. So unfortunately, the last few years, permits for recreational fisheries do not exist in Greece. So everybody can go out and fish as much as they can. The point is, of course, there are some restrictions. So each time they can go, if there is going to be someone who will go and check on them, they're supposed to catch only, limited number of fish, but enforcement is not really there. As I said, there are no permits, so on and so forth. And this is particularly really destructive in MPA areas. And there is also a question, I'm not sure I understand very well the French, but in any case from Alain, in relation to small-scale fisheries. So the main conflict there, are the relations between recreational fisheries and small-scale fisheries. So of course, small-scale fishers, we make the living, from the resources of the different areas, particularly the MPAs. We should take into account, first of all, their needs. And actually, although in Greece we do not have permits for now, which is of course something that should be reevaluated in general, but particularly MPAs, permits should be brought forward and then balance, the needs of, first of all, small-scale fishers, and make room. And this is, the MSP concept of bringing stakeholders together. So yes, there is an association, Alain, of small-scale fishers in Greece. And of course, there is also local associations. So in the park, there is an association of fishers, small-scale fishers working there. There are problems, local problems that should be resolved. And this is why, actually, I showed that in my presentation. Each area has unique problems, that actually stem from the distinct social ecological systems in each of the areas. So we need to have specific objectives, derived, of course, in relation to biodiversity, but also to social ecological needs, and actually make trade-offs, balance these objectives, and actually make, the people, the local communities, allies to scaling up these efforts of restoration, as actually recommendation 1.4, promotes. So I think that this close interaction with our key stakeholders, the people who are the local communities of the area. So fishers are, of course, very important in the Mediterranean. And there is also some, some reaction of Alain also in relation to industrial fishery. So in Greece, of course there is, but not so much in MPAs, because MPAs are rather low, let's say, shallow areas where medium-scale fisheries do not fish. There is a limit of 1.45 nautical miles from the coastal line where small-scale fisheries actually operate. So this is for me for the moment, and okay, we can discuss further, I guess. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess it will help us to address some recommendations. Well, it's quite interesting everything you said. I have a question for you, because in your presentations, in a sense, we have marine spatial planning at the Mediterranean scale in one MPA, organized by private sectors or economic sectors. In the end, in all MPAs, you always have some marine spatial planning done by a big scale or local scale. And in the end, what do we want to do is to be able to have an effective marine spatial planning. So to be effective, I would say, what should be what is the biggest mistake not to do when we start a marine spatial planning, according to you? if you, let's say I'm manager of an MPA, which is not the case, but I want to start a marine spatial planning, first at which scale? That means, do I only have a look on my APA or do I go a bit further? And if I want to be effective, that means behind some solutions will be implemented to basically increase or improve the biodiversity in the short term. So basically, we know it's been ages we try to do some marine spatial planning. And about your experience and feedback, what should be the first step to do to be sure that in the end, we will see quickly and in a short time effectiveness and change in the biodiversity? It's a huge question. But has someone an idea how to do it?
Actually, I could give it a try. So, okay, can I go? Okay, thank you. For example, I would like to share my experience from Greece. As you already know, maritime spatial planning is evolving. So most countries were supposed, at least in the EU, to have the maritime spatial plans by March 2021. For Greece, we're a bit delayed, but the basic idea is that our government has two main phases. One relates to the general maritime strategy that has, let's say, this is the overarching national umbrella. And then underneath, the real planning takes place at the regional, sub-regional level. So this is why it is really related to this, the need of taking these tailor-made approaches that actually reflect this local, let's say, more local conditions. What I would say is that, looking at the specific areas that have a clear, bioregional concept, because, for the moment, we need, first of all, to delineate these more or less management units for maritime spatial planning. In Greece, management units are not clearly, let's say, delineated up to now. All these, let's say, concepts and ideas are still evolving. So there are a couple of pilots they're dealing with, but this is the basic idea. So in these management units, I think that the MPAs are, let's say, distinct places with very specific objectives, as should be the general plan of the MSP. So these objectives should relate to the goals, the conservation goals, that in fact, all this should be aligned with, let's say, this key biodiversity areas also promoted by IUCN. The idea there is to come up with areas that are really important for preserving biodiversity. So going to this 30% goal of closing areas, these should be areas that really would profit and would really restore our biodiversity, because we have actually seen, from our experiences the last 10 years or so, many countries try to, let's say, fulfill the Aichi target, but by closing down areas which were either paper parks or not really done with standardized scientific criteria. So all this process, and this is why I'm saying that conservation planning, to actually make sure that you come up with the right areas that should be protected, should run in parallel with maritime spatial planning in a truly collaborative way. I think integration of these two processes is really of key importance. I'm not sure if I've answered to your question.
Well, it was a good, yes, of course.
So that's, yeah, thank you. Yes, thank you. I'm Dania Abdelmalak. I work in the University of Malaga. And my question is a bit to Catherine, I think. So Catherine, from Pharos, clearly you, I mean, in this map you showed, you zone differently, no? In an ideal scenario, how areas should be without, within a zone, no? Within the zonations that, that are within the MSP plans. So what we heard from Celia and what we heard from Vincent are really very narrowed, like local activities that need to be like tailor-made and discussed and somehow decided, building on very local factors, I would say. So what towards this where we are here, I mean, in this these days, towards these recommendations, what is to be upscaled from what we heard, and where this should be a new recommendation or part of the recommendations, maybe partly of Pharos as well, and in which zones? So to me, okay, we heard very good, I guess, ideas on how ecosystem-based approaches could be applied to my understanding, inside marine protected areas, but also in some cases outside marine protected areas, right? Because Catherine, you showed clearly what is the seascape around the marine protected areas, and there's a need to do something also at this scale. So how do these local, like, best practices fit into this broader map that you showed inside this MSP planning?
Thank you very much, Dania, for the question. I think you have a point. There's a discussion to have at different scales. So there's definitely the local scale, and then there's the scale around the MPA, but there's also a discussion to have at national scale. As Celia was saying, the discussion on identifying where to have the 30% protection is a discussion that should take place definitely at national scale and also at regional scale, so that we have a large view on the issue. This is for sure. Also, there should be some discussion at national level and also at regional level on assessing the compatibility between MPAs and some sectors. We've been focusing a lot today on fisheries issues, and this is a very important debate in MPAs, but there are also very big industrial developments at the moment in the Mediterranean. We didn't talk about the offshore wind farm development. We didn't talk about the development of maritime traffic, the development of the large yacht segment, for instance, leisure boating industry, and the impact of anchoring. So there are lots of issues that need to be addressed at a much larger scale than the MPA. And the recommendation I would have is that, and that stems from the results of the Pharos, is that each country, based probably on the best science available, should also have developed its own philosophy, its own approach on the compatibility of MPAs and other sectors. And to give an example for the leisure boating industry in France, our Ministry of Environment has developed a strategy for all the coastline, not only at MPA level, but like taking an overall view of this sector, how it's developing, with its needs, what are the trends, where are the MPAs and the sensitive habitats located, and they develop a strategy at the whole coastline level. And this can be replicated for other sectors. So maybe here I would like to give the floor to Frédéric, who can also give his view on this, representing the French Biodiversity Agency, and is working on some of these issues. He can give you also his feedback for maybe the compatibility of the offshore wind farm industry and MPAs, and also maybe some feedback on how a national agency can tackle this issue of maritime spatial planning.
It wasn't planned. Okay. Yes, actually, what you say is really interesting. And to answer your question, because it was also what I was trying to think, we always organize marine spatial planning or in MPAs, but if I take a concrete example, for Posidonia, you have Posidonia outside MPAs. So what's the point to plan actions to avoid impact in MPAs if you have impact outside the MPA? So we have to go further, I think. And in a sense, that's true. What has been done in France for mowing, it's by the maritime prefect, is to ban all yachts, all boats above 24 meters in Posidonia. But why has it been done? Is because he has the power to do it. And I think something I didn't hear so much so far. It's highly important to include all stakeholders, but also the ones who take the decisions at the end. And if you plan at a scale where you have two types of decisions, most probably it's not going to work easy. If you decide to think of marine spatial planning at a scale where you have the key stakeholder, which will be in charge to put in practice what has been decided, then you may have a chance to basically convince him to do it if you start from the beginning. If you have two types of decisions, it would be difficult. In Spain, you have the region, the national government, and for some items, it would be more the regions. Maybe we should think also, if we want to be effective, we have to think of who at the end will be in charge to put the decisions and to imply them really quickly. Fishermen, of course, it's important. If I take the example of, I have two examples actually, offshore wind farms. 10 years ago, I was working on the first marine spatial planning for offshore wind farm. Well, 15 years after, we still don't have any implemented offshore wind farms in France. So that basically means we did what we could with the data we had, but we were lacking data, and population was not ready, basically, to have this thing. Or maybe the consultation meeting were too important in the end to basically have a consensus disagreement about this thing, I would say. So basically, that's what I mean. It's really difficult to find something which will be effective. We have so many plans where we always have maps. We should do it. But in the end, not many things happen. And I will finish with an example about spearfishing because actually it's interesting. In the French Riviera, I'm working basically on the marine spatial planning for competitions for spearfishing. There's a huge debate where to do the competitions. So for 1 year, we're working with local associations to define areas where it would be, okay, here, this year, the competition is here, next year it would be somewhere else, which is a huge work to be able to plan in different areas in each MPA where we should go, which year, what is the space between the competitions, depending on the MPA. So after 1 year, we're really happy, but then there's something we didn't take into account. It was the position of professional fishermen. We started for 1 year to discuss with them, and then we went to see the fishermen. Say, okay, here, what we think, it's good. We're not going to fish in this place every year. But then, for some reasons, we had some issues. So that was a perfect example to say, if you want to make it work, include from the beginning the key stakeholders, and then directly go to see the authorities. Say, okay, I'm going to do this thing. Once the document is done, please, can you do it in a time lapse that is accepted? If you work 2 years of consultation meetings and then for the next 5 years, nothing happens, you basically are in difficulty when you speak again with these people. So I think it's also this question of time lapse, which is important. If you do marine spatial planning and you ask people to make a lot of effort to discuss everything, you need to prove you have a result in a reasonable short time. I would say it would be my 2 recommendations, I guess, to include authorities at the right level, and basically if we do it, it's behind, we worked already with the authorities, say, I start this thing, and basically it's to be able to have a quick decision. Okay. Maybe someone else wants to,
maybe one last reaction, because I think we need to close the session.
Merci, François Simard de l'IUCN. Je vais parler en français un petit peu pour changer. Je voudrais dire que je pense que le point de départ de MSP, il faudrait quand même que ce soit toujours l'identification des services écosystémiques. Ça me paraît fondamental de bien comprendre, quelle que soit l'échelle à laquelle on se place, mais à une échelle plus importante que celle purement de la MP, de comprendre quels sont les services écosystémiques qui sont là et pourquoi telle et telle activité en ont besoin. C'est-à-dire que quand on parle de pêche, d'aquaculture, de tourisme, de beaucoup de choses, on se rend compte que c'est toujours lié à un service écosystémique qui est présent, qui n'est pas présent. Donc le planning, le MSP doit prendre ça en considération, l'identification et la conservation de ces services écosystémiques. Donc un MSP qui prend en considération bien les services écosystémiques et qui prend leur conservation et de la façon dont on va les conserver dans le planning, me paraît un MSP qui va vraiment aller de l'avant. Ça, c'était une première chose. Et la deuxième chose, puisque c'est fini, je voudrais aussi que dans les recommandations, on n'oublie pas quand même les OICMs qui sont quand même, en termes de MSP, quelque chose de très important, puisque ça va être des zones qui vont délivrer de la conservation sans en avoir vraiment la volonté de le faire, mais qui vont le faire. C'est la définition des OICMs. Et je pense que sur la question des MSP, c'est fondamental de prendre en considération aussi ces OICMs, et pas seulement les AMP. Donc 2 points. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, François. De bons points.
A last comment or desire to say something? Well, Catherine, I'll let you conclude if you want to.
Well, thank you very much to all. We'll try to put this into consistent and readable recommendations. We would need there's I don't know if we have a tech support, because there are messages, a couple of messages online. Alain, would you like to read your message? Okay, maybe I will read them for you. So Alain Blaillot added some more recommendations. He suggested to really clearly identify what is at stake on the mid and long term. And I will go up again to see if there are other messages that come from Alain. He also mentioned that in France and Spain, the scale of Prud'homies, and in Spain, cofradías, have many centuries of experience, and that the right scale for maritime spatial planning should be devised, also taking in account this traditional experience. Alain, I hope I reflected your thoughts. Okay, thanks to all, and looking forward to continue the discussions after the session in some way or another. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, all of you.